Sorry. Thank you, Jonathan. Public participation session. Nobody. Apologies.
Check in with Councillor Radford because whether you want to talk about the local plan, which you mentioned now, because standing orders don't allow contributions from members of the public during discussion, because as say that the business is considered by the committee. However, Mr. Chair, you may, given it's an item on local plan, perhaps think about discretion at this point, and then we need to tighten up or be clear what the rules are.
Does it explicitly, what's the word, rule out that councillors can't speak? Or is it just, it doesn't say that they can?
While Aaron's looking, which bit are you actually wanted to speak to, Rosie?
I would like to add some general thoughts to ideas around aspects of the local plan that I would encourage to be part of.
Okay, so in that case, if she is a member of the public, which I would dispute myself, then we'll do that public participation session when we do the local plan part. But I still think she's elected and she's fully entitled to go to every meeting of the council.
You may need to amend standing orders for that to be the case. I'm not absolutely not trying to be difficult. I just want to make sure we get it right. But it's clear, because you come into voting on things and you've got members who are influencing decisions. So I think that there is a transparency issue there generally. But it says the conduct of the business of each committee shall be limited to the members thereof and officials. All order of debate and conduct shall be defined for procedure at council meetings. So it says the members thereof of the committee, so those members who are appointed to the committee. So I think members who are not on the committee in a little bit of a grey area. Are you a member of the public, or what are you? Especially when it comes to planning matters and it's not defined.
I'll just because from my experience elsewhere at Bridge North and that, the members who aren't on the committee sit in a different area, because otherwise whoever's in the chair won't know who's on the committee or not necessarily. And they would speak, but they wouldn't be involved in the debate necessarily unless you've suspended standing orders. So it's like public participation session, in that they would do their bit at the front and speak to whatever the board issue is, and then the meeting itself is the committee doing the actual decision.
And if that's the route that council want to go, that's fine. There's nothing, as far as I can see, and I may be wrong, anything the standing orders that they're not set. However, we want to make sure we get most of the debate. This item was delegated by council, so you could probably make exception. So I'll leave you to that.
I mean, if it's not explicit, you can't even suspend standing orders to allow, can you, really? No. James?
As the chair, could you move the local plan to the start of the agenda before the application, so Rosie can speak as part of the 15 minutes, and then we go straight into the debate, so effectively it's the same.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to vary the order. There's no other members of the public or anybody online, so then Rosie can go home if she wants, or she can listen to the rest of it, but I'll leave that to okay, right, I'll just get all the other bits of paper open that I was going to do while we were doing the rest, but anyway, carry on. So, apologies then. No, because we've moved that to the local plan item, and then that will be the first one after the minutes, before we go on to the application.
So, apologies from Councillor Flanagan.
Okay. Yeah. Is everybody happy to accept those apologies? Jonathan, James, yeah, okay. Disclosure of councillors' interest in any matters in relation to the code of conduct. I'll go to my left.
Simple switch. Flummoxes me. Right, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's the usual. I'm a member of the Shropshire Council's Northern Planning Committee, so obviously I will make that declaration, but any decisions in the Planning Committee in Shropshire will be taken on the stuff that's actually presented at that meeting, and it will have no effect what we discussed tonight and the observations we make tonight.
In terms of myself, because I'm the portfolio holder for planning, I'll declare the interest, same as I did last week, in that, because this is essentially my paper that you're all commenting on. I'm not going to express my own opinion on it. I'm not going to vote on it, but I'm here to help facilitate whatever everybody else talks about, if that makes sense. Yeah, okay. Minutes, is everybody happy that the minutes are accurate? Everyone in favour of that? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So Shropshire local plan consultation, it's scope and consultation. So as I've said to others before, it's not about the individual site allocations. The sites that are on the map are the raw sites put forward by developers and landowners for the local plan for consideration. They're all subject to assessment still, and many of them may not pass the assessment. So it's the thrust of the consultation is around what's in or not in consideration for the local plan, whether there's particular areas of evidence that should be considered that aren't mentioned in the stuff about the process, and there's just generally the scope. So it is a RONSI, or what it says on the tin. I'm happy to open it up. Do you want the map of the sites around, or is everybody happy with what they've looked at? Right, okay. I just thought because you'd said to everybody to look at it in advance when we talked about it last week.
Sorry, first the feedback looking for is around, because we're responding to the consultation and those 15 questions.
Yeah, that's
so
it.
I don't know, Mr. Chair, if how you want to play that, because whether you want to have a discussion and let me try and fit things in, or whether you want to go through the questions.
I think it'd be better for you if we go through the questions, because some of them will be yes, no type of questions, and you get rid of those, and then you can get down to the, because some places have taken 2 hours to fill it in, and I wouldn't suggest we have a bun fight, but we'll distill the flavour of the discussion in the comment, and if it's two contrary things, I'm not too worried about that, but it's important to get over the sentiment, really.
I've got the questions here. Do you want me to read the questions out?
Yeah, if you do that, right. Yeah.
So the first four, you do need a little bit of understanding behind it as well, because you need to flow. And I have to say, I've read the document at length today, and it was a really well put together consultation. Really easy to follow because I've managed to do it. So it obviously must be. So there's a series of questions. The first four are about tell me who you are you represent the council, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So, and then we get on to talk about the vision and measurable outcomes. So question 5 is, how important do you feel each of the identified national considerations are when determining the key priorities of the vision? You know what? We need to see it, don't we? If members haven't got it in front of them. Yeah. So
It's
it's on the front page of Shropshire Council's website. And
yeah, I've just got the, it's, I can read out the URL if you want to put it in your browser, because then you could share it on the screen, can't you?
The easiest way to do this is not to...
Sorry? Oh yeah, no, I can say the actual destination rather than go click, click, click. That's what I thought.
So what I'm going to try and do, so you, if you don't mind, then, because I'm trying to do two things at once.
Or I can email you the actual.
No, I was looking at it today, so...
Oh, right, okay. History.
It's just how I show it to you, because my laptop isn't connected to that.
At least we know we're not talking at cross purposes at any point. Yeah, well, if we get because if it's pertinent to a particular part, then I'm happy for Rosie to wait till we get to that part rather than do it all up front. Otherwise, it's the same problem for her.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to do. Okay. So what I need to do now, because I've got the mic in there. So if we move the presentation up here, it won't be like the last worst case scenario, will it? So now I need to do this, and then...
It's because you've got to toggle the input on the screen. Or if you pull the other HDMI lead out, it'll probably just go to the laptop then. No, because what he's trying to open is the actual response form, and I'd go to the alternative response form rather than the actual electronic.
We have ended up crashing my laptop. Because I've got Teams on here as well doing that meeting. I'm trying to do this. It's just causing a little bit too much.
If when you go to the get involved.
Oh yeah, if that's okay.
Yeah, do that.
I'll just also have in front of the screen.
HDMI. I've got the mini tiny one.
I've got an extension.
No, it's a very small one, isn't it? Oh, no, it's USB-C, isn't it?
Yeah. They have a hub to connect into.
That's not going to work, is it?
Wait for it. He's done it before.
The problem I have is this, isn't it? Because this is on the computer, this isn't on telly.
But the input for that is that box there, is it? Or so if that's disconnected, the screen should detect the other input.
Oh, no, it's not there. Have they got a weird setup, isn't it?
It should look like that, the electronic Word version of it. Yes, and then you've got very important. So, so you've got the electronic version of the PDF. Oh, right, okay. Well, it's the same thing, but
Are you happy to not have the planning applications up, given that they're fairly straightforward?
sorry to.
No, I'm
Make it
just
awkward,
worried that most of the meeting's going to be taken up by my IT skills and not actually what we need to be
Well,
doing.
it could have been last week, so that would have been fundamental.
Well, what does that say? Does that say power? Oh yeah, let's try that. Let's try that. Yeah, let's try that. I don't know.
It's like the golden shot. Down a bit. Yeah, that's the problem. Sorry? I was before my time, but I just heard about it.
I actually watched it.
If you type in scoping consultation, it'll be the first answer on the browser. So in the search box at the top, scroll up a bit.
I do know my stuff.
Yeah. And then if you go right the way down,
These are the issues, and then that's the question. Yeah. So it tells you that this division is, these are fun. If you've got lots to read, then it asks the question.
yeah, yeah,
So there.
okay.
If it's okay, Chair, I've had a look through just in terms of our priorities as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Is it okay if I contribute as well?
yeah, yeah, of course it is, yeah.
Okay. Right, over to you. Read all of that.
Well, I'm assuming everybody's read it beforehand, really, but
So essentially this first question is asking you how important do you think these national considerations are, and I suppose is there anything missing as a question?
so so Rosie, how do you, what is your point of input? Is it general, like you said, or is it going to be specific on I don't mind if you chip in on a particular question, to be honest.
So I have something to add to question 19, and I've got something to add to just G, I think, on here. And I think as a general statement around probably F as well.
Would it be okay if we dealt with those
Yeah,
as
yes.
public participation? Because other members aren't here, and then it's clearly, I can minute it clearly as that there's public participation.
Yeah.
And then you can hit it, and then Rosie can go. So Rosie, what do you want to? Do you want to give us your feedback rather than looking through this? Do you want to?
Okay, question 19. Should I go? I'll want to come back to this. Was it question 19? Talked spaces that we have taken up or about to take up as a council, that we have a way of linking up those areas, whether it's via footpaths, whether it's via public transport, whether it's via promotion and encouragement. But as the number of houses increases, and the benefits of having accessible open spaces, I think it's really important that we really promote those areas to the public and to our residents. I think we need to be quite overt and active about promoting those things. I think going back to where are we? Question 5 around health and inclusivity. I think when you are planning in this way, building a resilient community is really important, and we don't use that word during the local plan, and that's fine, but I think we do need to be thinking about the resilience of an ageing population and the accessibility of our opportunities for supporting health and preventative health. So what am I trying to say? I think I am trying to say that there are lots of things that you can do that build resilient communities that aren't lonely and isolating, and have access to healthcare, have access to transport, have access to services in Oswestry. And then in terms of connectivity, one of my things I'm really interested in is around connecting our communities in Oswestry. And while we have a good local bus service, town service, of which we financially support some of, I would ask that the committee consider extending the scope of the town service to include stops along Shrewsbury Road, when we have 600 houses being built at the bottom of there, and we also have a various industrial growth at the end there, and that we try and look at ways of supporting people into town, into Oswestry Town Centre, rather than the ease of them being able to leave Oswestry to go to other places, and in doing so also look at the links to Giveowen Station, and allowing Oswestry to thrive for younger generations, so that they feel that they have the ability to come and go and expand out of Oswestry, but also that it is connected to the outside world. I think that's it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't have an issue with what you said at all, really. Because, as I've said to officers, this plan has got to design out problems. It can't build in problems all the time. So, in terms of connectivity and things, they've got to do that properly and master plan everything, rather than do it piecemeal, one development at a time. Mark, and then Jonathan, and then James.
Thank you, Chair. Just adding to what Rosie has just said, the first comment about question 19, linking the green areas, I would very much like to include the idea of where you've got paths in place already along sides of roads and things, that we include suitable crossings to allow safe access across the roads, because we do have some busy roads in Oswestry. I can think of Cabin Lane, I can think of Shrewsbury Road, I can think of College Road, and trying to link them across the busy roads. I think encouraging the implementation of crossings to do that is vitally important, and I know that we already have something in mind in terms for Cabin Lane, but it should be looked at across all the busy roads in Oswestry to facilitate the comments that Rosie said with that. The other thing was, as a point of information, the Future Oswestry Group agree with you as far as the bus service, that they would support you in actually extending it along Shrewsbury Road and down to the industrial estate, as well as the new development. Only they went as far as to say in the new development there's a road going straight through it, and therefore it's ideal to allow buses to go up through that as well. So you've got support there as well. It's great. and health and inclusivity was. Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to make a comment on those two to try and contribute and help. Thanks.
Jonathan?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd also like to, excuse me, add in about in addition to extending the town service to parts of the new developments, also looking at the existing routes that are providing parts of the town and looking at things such as whether the existing routes need to cover the town centre more so that they can bring people to and from places without having to change at centralised locations, or even looking at how frequent the services are as well, because for example there are some town service routes that operate say between 7 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. almost half hourly, and then you've got some that operate between say 8 and 3 hourly. There's no parity, so that's something that needs adding in as well.
James?
I think we've sort of, well, it's important, it's gone out of scope of this debate specifically if we could start talking about the town service, which is a separate issue that isn't necessarily planning, because the town service will come up next year anyway, and we're hoped to have some input into that. I think what we need to do is, for question 5 to move the debate on, is which of these national planning do we think are more important when in the vision. I think for Oswestry, as Rosie has pointed out, the connectivity and health and inclusivity specifically are more important for most residents of Oswestry than necessarily access to safeguarding minerals. Like, hopefully we're not going to have a mine in Oswestry anytime soon.
Just for clarity, the actual response form, which is not what you've got on the screen, you have to do a very important, neither important or unimportant, or very unimportant rating for those things, don't you?
I believe so, yes. Do we just have if we have the thing up on the screen and just go through the...
So that's why if you open up the actual manual response form, rather than all the blurb explaining the steps. Or the online form, because you're not going to be filling it in until later. So if you go back a page, and then you go right down, underneath all these icons, hang on, how to get involved, go down. You've got an alternative version of the response form, or you can do the online form. And that'll give you the structure of how you're going to fill it in. It will let you page through all of them without filling it in. Because it's like 1 to 4 questions, and then, so don't fill anything in yet, just go down. Well, that's why you can do the alternative method, and then you don't have to submit it. If you press next at the bottom. Close that tab. And that'll download a Word file. And then it gives you a bit of preamble, and then all the questions, and in the format it's expected. So it's not saying pick one over another, it's just getting you to a rating of James. And there's a box underneath to put the comments that members have made about connectivity.
chair is basically, no, if I propose, and then it'll be easier that way, as you don't really want to guide the discussion.
No, I'll just facilitate it,
Yeah.
really.
So it's a matter of planning to deliver a sufficient number of homes, I believe does come up a lot for the council, and therefore I would personally propose that it would be very important, which has agreement of the making available sufficient employment land is also very important.
If you cancel it, and just ignore the bit at the top. If yeah, we'll have to sign into Word then, because you won't be able to do it, or save a copy. Click on that edit a copy button again. It's going to downloads. That's it. That's it. Yeah. Because it's come here not to full council, it's going to have to go back to full council to actually endorse the actual decision, isn't it? Is it okay? Yeah. Okay. So X marks the spot.
Can I come back and say, looking through all of those and linking it to the priorities of the council, I think all of them are very important, other than minerals, which would probably be neither important or unimportant. For the rest of them, effectively are our corporate plan. That was, yeah, and then that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have to explain our answers, particularly if you've commented that any of the identified considerations are unimportant.
So in that box you could summarise what Rosie said and Jonathan said.
Yeah. And just linking it back to our corporate plan and the priorities of the council, that we feel that these are all important goals to include within the vision of the document. I don't think you don't need to fill that in now, I assume. Okay.
It's the only way you can do it practically as a group, is doing it question by question. Yeah, yeah. So if the Word file's got the ticks in the boxes, and then the minutes are the bits that go in the explanations.
Okay, so I think we've got that one fine.
Okay. So, first one's infrastructure-led, ensuring efficient infrastructure is available to provide to support development, which is essentially part of what Mark and Rosie have already said. Mark?
rurality is important, but as the town council, maybe it's less emphasis compared to smaller communities out in the country. It's still important for us to acknowledge it because it's surrounding us, isn't it? But is that as important, or do we?
Well, that's up for you to decide, but I would argue you're commenting on the whole thing, not just
But we're
Oswestry.
commenting, Mr. Chairman, on Oswestry Town Council's.
You're putting Oswestry's input in, but the question is about their approach. It's not about
This area.
this area
this
per
town.
se.
Okay,
You could nuance it and put
Yeah.
things in the explanation, but in terms of answering the questions,
that's fine. In that case, that's important. Yeah, very important.
James.
I'd also argue that rurality is still important to embrace part of the characteristic of Oswestry. Like, you don't want to start building high-rises, for example, just because you've decided you're an urban centre.
And it's how you react with the rural hinterland in both directions.
And we do have a farm within the Oswestry boundary, and therefore there is still a rural element to Oswestry.
James.
I think, as Rosie mentioned earlier, it's a matter of highlighting the weakness of an ageing demographic and specifically ensuring that when having a vision, it's that we don't plan in barriers to ageing within new developments. We already have difficulties in my area of if you're putting in a drive, it dips the pavement, and it's things like that that you need to plan out at this stage for future development, not put the same barriers in for the future and then have to amend them later.
There's a lot of crossover with health and all policy and the scrutiny review, which has a particular emphasis on planning. That talks about designing out problems and making sure you build things that are accessible to start with. Mark?
I'm not sure where you'd put this because it's something which we've noticed in this area for the last few large plan applications. But talking about building facilities in, I've noticed that in my ward where there's that huge 600 house development, there's been nothing in the last 10 years as part of that development to include things for the local people in that development. In other words, there's no indication about a shop or a community area with 600 people. Now, how would we put that in to make sure that when you're looking at developing a town, you have the facilities within the larger areas where there's housing to make sure that the residents who go there have the facilities they need without having to travel long distances?
But the
Well,
question is...
it's an
Yeah,
opportunity
yeah.
and it's a threat
Yeah.
Designing,
if you don't do it. Yes. That's excellent.
And when that application you're referring to, you talked about the footpath and those placing that, and it wasn't the same. And I remember we talked about the other thing on the hillside, how that actually dovetailed and connected with the rest of town.
That's true.
So
It's
all relevant to
It's the
actual-
opportunity of linking in current official footpaths to make sure you can get the
but that's
community
what
links, which is what Rosie was
Rosie
mentioning.
said before.
Yeah.
The question is, are there any strengths or weaknesses that are missing? Yeah, and deprivation in general. John?
I think the community infrastructure common is not just an opportunity, but there is a weakness as well, because it puts a strain on existing infrastructure, not just shops and that, but schools, health centres, and with additional population serving existing infrastructure, that would need factoring in.
Yeah, well, it's in the threats list. Second one's challenges providing services due to large and again ageing demographics again, and then so it's it's an element of are we happy with the what they've identified as the strengths and weaknesses or not, and then doing what we're doing now and just explaining why we think something's. We're not going to challenge you on your spelling until the end. If you turn auto save on at the top, then you won't have to worry about it. Yeah, but it doesn't matter if it goes into Aaron's OneDrive. If he clicks the top one, it'll constantly save to there, and then you'll. Okay. All right. Sorry. We certainly don't want to be doing it this way again. I don't think. Anyway. James.
I think that we've put our considerations to be relevant to the key priorities in our previous answers, and therefore for this one, there aren't any extras that we'd add into this section.
Because that was certainly a weakness identified by the inspectors with the last plan. They didn't talk about the infrastructure around employment enough.
I'm happy to propose that instead that we do answer that there's a weakness around not prioritising employment for the houses that are actually here. Like, you don't want to be turning us into the Milton Keynes of the country where everyone just commutes out of Shropshire because there's no jobs in Shropshire.
Oh.
This would be a good point. I did.
It did, I saw it.
Is this a good point to identify a weakness in terms of literal communications? Because we all know about the mobile coverage of the town and the surroundings. It's to try and ensure that there is, as part of the planning, that we do have the infrastructure put in to allow physical communication through mobile devices.
It's there, the penultimate weakness, which is impact on of rurality on delivery of electronic communication technology.
Yeah, I missed it.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Oh no, but you can put more emphasis on it because it's like water and food now, isn't it, for a lot of people, especially in a rural area.
You're mentioning employment, and sometimes you are, as part of your employment, you do things remotely, and it's vital you have the good communications with broadband type communication in order to establish that communication back to your place of work
And if we
it
want to
happens
bring
to be elsewhere.
quality jobs here, they need to have the comms to be able to do
Yeah, that's it.
So, yeah. Yeah.
I personally don't think that deliverability is, I'd say agree rather than strongly agree, as it will be on a case by case. How do I word it? In my head, I understand what I'm trying to say, and I can't put it out. But it's not really on us or the plan to decide whether it's deliverable. It's usually like the main reason that you don't deliver is because it costs. And
I think because it's social strategy, what it's talking about is the deliverability of the plan,
okay,
because the inspectors had issues with how deliverable it was.
that's
But
probably
I mean, you can talk about the actual deliverability of housing development
yeah.
and build out rate things. But I don't think that's the context of
I
this
think
question.
This is also where, I think it's whether we mention a comment of there's quite a lot of phased planning applications, and phases should be individual planning applications, not one large thing where they then don't come back with the phasing.
Well, if you go back to the application we had before, that was for the second half of the 2 phases, and if it had come forward in one phase, then there'd be a better argument about getting the facilities in the community that mass would have warranted. But doing with 2 separate applications, the other half doesn't count to the other one, so it dilutes the.
I think that actual built-in historic environment is very important. Yeah, I think promotion of economic growth leads into what we just spoke about, unmet neighbouring need, sustainable and appropriate to accommodate. I would ask for clarification on that.
In the previous withdrawn plan, we had a duty to cooperate, and then they had to absorb houses from the Black Country, and that caused a lot of the problem that led to the withdrawal of the plan. But in all the blurb, it says they need to talk and consult with the neighbours, and if there is an opportunity, then they can talk around providing commercial development or housing allocation to meet that need of theirs. It's not an obligation like it was before. So it's around that chat with Cheshire, East and West and Staffordshire.
I think if I could come back in,
Yeah.
I'm still on. I think it's important for Oswestry because we have border areas which feed into the town, and they probably come, like if you built 200 houses in Llansilin, they would be facing us. So it's important that we do have that and make sure that we discuss the needs of that to help our sustainability going forward.
Because it's almost like NHS provision. Everybody in Wales relies on the PRH or Wrexham for parts of around here. People go up there. So it's a similar approach in terms of housing and commercial. It's how much you lean in and out across the county border. Not necessarily around Austria and its hinterland, but that's how far you take it, I suppose.
So I'd say strongly agree with. But it's up to the whole committee, not just me saying yes.
Yeah, I think we would speak if we disagreed. I think it's a matter of listening, and we will say
It's just
something.
Keeping a powder dry to jump on a ton of bricks.
Yeah, you're saying the words, and I think if we disagree strongly, we would come in. So at the moment, we're going along with that.
One of you decide. Mark? Yeah.
I was going to say that what you said was valuable because you explained your reasoning, because I didn't quite understand what you meant when you're talking about giving examples of Llansilin and round in Wales, because we're so close. That then made obvious sense, and was a strongly agree response, so thank you for that.
The answer is saying how we are bordered by quite a lot of other rural authorities which have the same issues that we do, and therefore there is a greater need for cooperation across, as we share infrastructure with our local authorities.
If you take the big example round here would be Llanymynech, and half of it's in Wales and half of it's in England, so they've got to talk cross-border, because you can't treat just the English side of Llanymynech and do all the number crunching on that without even taking any account of Welsh. Sorry, I wasn't going to express an opinion, but I am.
Are there any other considerations you believe should inform the preparation of the housing requirement for Shropshire? I think the considerations they've listed are effectively encompassing of what they need to consider. I'd suggest that the evidence base they'll use around housing need, there is a underlying, for example, with the housing list, people don't apply to the list thinking that it's not worth applying, so there's even the evidence we can collect might not show the true housing need of the area. It's a matter of making sure that the evidence collected.
I know when they did the housing needs surveys across the county, they worked out what the need was for the people who wanted to move there and then. And it didn't really identify the need of the people who weren't even looking to move because there was nowhere to go to or whatever. So you have to look at the overall need and the unmet need and the underlying need as well. But
I think that's under the next question.
And some of that need would be about having live work, mixed use things rather than having housing here and employment over there. You have much closer proximity sometimes. On the one you put at the top of the box above where you've talked about phase planning applications, you might need to explain that.
I think employment land comes at the next, it says employment land requirement just under that, so I think this is for specifically housing need, and then we go on to employment need. Yeah. So maybe the answer is linking, or more heavily linking housing to employment, rather than seeing them as two separate issues.
Yeah.
I think what Aaron said is very, very important, and that you are building to the income of your residents, but we must also acknowledge what we said previously about using communications as part of your work, because it's not just a low-wage economy only. There's also a higher wage economy where people are actually working from the likes of Birmingham, Wrexham and further North Chester, and using the communication links to enable them to do that. So you're not just building houses for the economic level of the residents, because it's no longer just the agricultural workers. There is a mix of people, and therefore that needs to be reflected in the construction as well.
Yeah, well, you still need to, if you've got a very narrow specific need, that doesn't mean there's an absence of anything else, because you need to encourage diversity sometimes.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
Jonathan.
This might seem minor in the scheme of things, but have we considered what home-based infrastructure is required compared to the status of people who move in. It can be anything such as what type of, whether as we're moving over from, say, copper to digital telephone lines, or even charging points in certain areas of the estates, or even if, because some newer houses are having solar panels installed like that. Is there scope to consider that as a factor as well?
We've just done the SPD on design standards, and that covers a lot of the things you're talking about, but the building regs cover a lot of it as well, and they specify the height of the socket above the floor, and they don't go down there anymore, they're up a metre off the floor sort of thing. Mark?
Just as a point of information, really, what Jonathan's actually describing, a lot of the new houses are bringing in heating, which is source heat pump, and there's an automatic then solar panel that goes with it to power it. So as the economy moves away from the gas and the oil and thing, it goes to a source of energy which requires what you've described. So that's great. You know, it's,
And also, it's a silly little example, but some modern houses have even got, they've got your electricity sockets, but you've got USB ports as well as your standard 3-pin plug. So it's those little things like that that make the huge difference in this modern world.
Yeah. James?
I think Aaron wants to move on to the employment thing, so it was. But just to, I think we've gone into the employment bit, so it's a matter of, as far as I'm aware, all of those are also strongly agree as important aspects. I think on balanced growth, what Aaron said about catering for the low-wage economy, you also want to think of, do we want to stay as a low-wage economy, or are the young people of Oswestry actually want to aim higher to that but stay in Shropshire at the moment? If you have sort of a science technology background, you move out, you go to a city. Like, do you want to cater to try and keep those in Shropshire, or do you accept that to do that they will move out? So it's, when you're planning the employment, you need to base it around what the future needs or the future employment looks like, rather than just keep on because if you keep on catering for low wage economy, you'll just keep the low wage economy there because you won't actually change anything. The people who live in Shropshire will be in the low wage economy and they'll move out to get to the high wage. So it's making sure that you're taking the sort of needs of the future employees and envisioning and making that decision of which direction we're going. There's nothing wrong with staying as an agricultural low-wage economy. Like, if that's how the area's traditionally been, and you just have to improve the transport networks to allow it to be easier for people to live in Shropshire but go out to do it. It's completely up to Shropshire residents to decide how they want that to be. Yeah. Shrewsbury's already connected. We need Oswestry to also enjoy that level of sort of connectivity to the wider. Yes.
Yeah. Jonathan?
And also in the reverse of using the employment land to drive economic growth, looking at what opportunities can happen in reverse. So say, for example, if a big company decided to relocate to Oswestry and brought half their workforce with them, they'll need housing to to live in, so there would be the reverse opportunity as well.
You say, the considerations are you catering to the current workforce or catering to a future aspiration of workforce? And getting that balance right.
Because the plan is to 2046.
Like, for example, I think
I'm trying
ACRE has brought in quite a...
Get them to frame the plan so they talk about much further than 2046, because you need to get all of your ducks in a row and do proper long-term planning. Yeah. Well, it's on the cusp. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, I believe I think one thing that going into council work I didn't grasp is that rural communities, like for example, if you have a school that's not sustainable, a way to make it sustainable is to build houses in that village to increase the number of children going to it. And if you just continue to increase the number of houses in Oswestry, you might actually take out the viability of schools in the surrounding areas. So it's important that as a Shropshire plan that you're not inadvertently adding more pressure to your infrastructure in Oswestry by making it only viable to live in Oswestry, and the smaller village schools end up just coming into Oswestry and adding to the infrastructure problems of the town itself. Balancing the viability of our rural hinterland with the urban centres, something like that.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting discussion about this. Talk about the lighting, for example,
Urban centres.
I'm seeing kind of planning applications in Northern Planning. A lot of the concerns when you're looking at the development of the more rural settlements is that they haven't got the infrastructure to handle it. It's a matter of, I'm not talking about infrastructure in terms of the school, I'm talking about the infrastructure in terms of the roads coming to and from, the water, the sewerage, that kind of infrastructure.
Yeah.
And it's important that if we're trying to encourage the balancing of the viability of the rural part with the town, you also have to balance the ability to actually have their sewerage and their water and their roads and things improved at the same time. Otherwise, they'll just get choked off.
In all the blurb, it talks about being infrastructure-led.
Yes.
So, in theory, the way I've described to officers is we've got to lean into places that have got the infrastructure, not suddenly parachute a load of things into places which have got them.
It sort of is, but isn't completely linked to development. But then there's also the question of, as the developments grow, the population of the village or town grows, the effect it will have on community governance. Because in theory, in 50 or 60 years' time, you could have a whole big enough to be a parish in itself. So that would need factoring in, and I'm not just talking like splitting towns, but perhaps would it mean that we'd need to reward a village? You know, like distribution of representation and that as well.
Certainly with Oswestry, if the rural edge keeps developing, then there'll be arguments about where the boundary of the town council area finishes. But, so there'll have to be a boundary review at some point, sure. And because you're talking about such a long period of time, then it's fair comment.
Strongly agree. I don't think there's any other way to look at where to put development in a rural area than Harwich community. It's sort of on a community by community basis. You can look at, for example, Bowen on size, and it will be completely different to, I think, well, St Martin's probably a good example of St Martin's to Wem is a different question, despite the fact that on paper they're quite similar. There's just it's completely different as far as, so you have to look at each community.
And if you, well, you'll know because of me talking to Heather Kidd, who's the leader. At times we have completely different views on places, but that's just because West Felton is a similar size to Cherbury, but it's the polar opposite in terms of the makeup of the village. Cherbury's got loads of services and one housing, and West Felton's got houses with no services. So you've got to be able to respond to all of the different needs.
For the next question, then, I think we just say strongly agree. Although we might want to mention that I think Oswestry and Mauder were put into one blob, which Mauder wasn't very happy about. It's whether I personally see the infrastructure of Mauder being very tightly linked to Oswestry. So I agree with the current methodology that Mauder should be part of the Oswestry community hierarchy.
It depends which bits you're talking around, but it's that Landamannock question again. Every time we've got, it's like Bridgnorth having 1,500 houses in Tassley Parish. There's an argument around what's in and what's not. When you're talking about a settlement, in theory, because it's different parish, you could say it's a separate garden village or whatever. So just how do you frame it, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. I think there's a view of the public that infrastructure is not considered in planning. So making sure that in the local plan it is highlighted and is a key area of consideration is important going forwards to ensure that when future development is accepted or not accepted, it's based on how viable they are in the area that it's planned. Yeah.
Maybe a fifth point could also be the considering the ecological effect on any kind of development as well. When it comes to, like, for example, building on floodplains as a key point as well, and the effect that that the ecological effect that it's not just having on that development, but also that development is having on the remainder of the town as well, such as drainage systems and that.
Yeah, well, it's one of the constraining factors.
It is a constraining factor,
Um,
and it's so serious. It's more than just infrastructure as well.
So maybe it's the natural infrastructure. Like, you think of infrastructure as like the built things, but you also need to think about how you're affecting the rivers, and it doesn't, like, putting a load of water into a river higher up does have a massive effect to the river downstream, or taking water out of the river. So it's a matter of making sure that natural infrastructure is also considered as just as important as artificial infrastructure. Once you've crossed the river or crossed the A5, you're free to develop Oswestry until you get to the next.
And this is one. Oh, sorry. This is one that does affect us. If the new development has enough signatures in accordance with the 1908 Act, whether there's enough green fields or land within said development where one could apply for allotments.
Acts on the statutory duties of local authorities. And say, e.g., parish councils having to provide allotment.
Are you saying that it should be built into the developments themselves? So in other words, where you've got a certain amount of development, as in Shrewsbury Road, say, that part of that development site should be included as part of like allotments? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's certainly community benefit, which isn't always, as I've said at a previous meeting, that's not always S106 money. Developers often provide money for community benefit to do things like allotments. Bridge North, they provided the football club for the Spartans. Oh yeah, but it's the same argument we were talking about neighbourhood plan. When you're talking about the shape of something, if you're master planning it, then you'll say that should be allotment, that should be tennis court, that should be, you're zoning it and you're actually designing it all in.
And another duty area's youth services as well, because you'll have families who are living there, and if they're families with children who are in a house on the edge of town where where the ability to get into the town centre is still a while away from being formed, like you know how some housing developments are piecemeal, aren't they? They a little bit at a time. It's about the what youth services are out there for the youngsters who could be adults by the time it's all fully built up.
Yeah. But I mean, that again comes back to that application in two halves. If it was one, then you would have been able to leverage getting more community benefit out of the whole.
I think, again, strongly agree. The Hill Fort is probably a brilliant example of, you got the Hill Fort, but you also have the fact that there was a lot of the old town was around the base of the Hill Fort, and just because it's a field now, and there is still archaeological benefit to what is just a farmer's field, and you don't want to build right up to the scheduled monuments because you, without taking into account that there could be archaeological, like you found Richard III or Richard the under a car park, like you don't know what is under something that's already developed. So,
but a lot of planning is about setting and views into and out from something, whether it's a SSI conservation area or the Hill Fort. So it's all relevant, but you need things that are sympathetic to get through, really.
I think strongly agree. Sort of, they're building in green spaces to developments, not just building a concrete jungle, so that you'll still keep it and making sure there's a green corridor, so that you're not just trapping a load of like wildlife in the middle of the development. They can get between them and do it safely. So you don't want a load of hedgehogs crossing a road like College Road because you've trapped them in the middle. Or frogs. Stoats. Toads.
It depends how many drinks you'd had at that point.
Just a very fat cat. But I think it's a matter of, it's also helpful for the health issues, like having wildlife and things. It's like there's known health benefits of being able to go and see sort of wildlife. Like I think in the Hampton Road area you've got a partridge or something that just walks around. Like it's part of being in the area. I don't think we can include pests. So.
I'm just waiting for another anecdote about that.
No. It's not just providing the links between the green corridors and the traditional way by providing the green corridor. It's also looking at alternative methods of providing those links, because you often see things like squirrel bridges across between tree areas. I mean, it's not just looking at the development on the ground. You need to look in 3 dimensions as well.
But in terms of the LNRS, it's not just about the big things either. It's sometimes the really small things like the depave stuff to actually get more soft spaces in it, a development, so you actually cut down the runoff as well. So you can tackle a lot of very specific issues in a multi-layered way.
You also need to make sure that you don't just put a pond in and then leave it to not be maintained, like Wilford Owen and all the Henley ponds, where there was wildlife and now they're just festering pools of traffic cones. Are there any other areas or assets you believe should be identified for conservation or enhancement. I think Offers and Watts Dyke is probably a good one. It's a natural green corridor where you can't build on it, and it offers the benefits of being a walking, and you need to enhance that, and sort of it has issues. It feeds into tourism, etc. as well. If you embrace the sort of
Well, and there's also a lot of, you can, it came up at the meeting I went to before this one, you can, certainly with the LRS and the Marches Ford Partnership and the Severn Management Scheme and all, there's over a long period of time there's been a lot of skill lost in rural areas, whether it's hedge layers or anything, and there's a big opportunity to reskill. But Jonathan?
In addition, I think for the tourism aspect, we need to emphasise, in addition to Offers and Watts Dyke, Oswald's Trail, which I know encompasses some of it, but it is a standalone. It's a standalone feature, so I think that needs mentioning.
I think it's the old railway routes as well. Like, they quite often are still owned by Shropshire Council and haven't been built on, but they form that sort of natural paths that you could work on to connect boundaries that you now can't put a train on.
Could have meant anything.
I think in Oswestry, saying important for the third one as well, like catering for our local communities and making sure that we're not just sort of placing them on a field somewhere and then moving them to then build houses on that, like giving them a permanent space to actually be on as part of the plan. Employment, I think we've already said, is very important, and retail and leisure, as, again, it's meeting our corporate priorities, and yeah, just explain the answer. I think it's important for all three of those to have them in the local plan. It's not necessarily part of our, like, you wouldn't put them in Oswestry, but I think there is you're going to run out, like, you can't mine Rodney's Pillar forever to get that, but the same geological makeup will be in other areas, and you have to make sure that you're planning for that going over the next 20, 30 years, so that you're not running out of mineral. And if you're building a load of houses, you need to get the mineral, get the ability to make those houses, and not be shipping bricks in from somewhere else.
Yeah, the renewable energy bit. Is it worthwhile also saying that it's not just making use of greenfield sites to plug in wind and solar, it's also making use of current infrastructure, such as car parks. I know it's the chair's area of expertise, but car parks, industrial buildings, there are so many sites where you could actually place solar that doesn't take up green areas. And at the moment, we don't make extensive use of that kind of thing. But putting that in the local plan to encourage it through whatever means, I think is going to be important.
John?
In addition to making use of sites with minerals, also taking into consideration the consequence of making use of sites with minerals as well. For example, I've heard of places where you'll build a housing estate on an old pit, and all of a sudden one day it's all sunk into the ground because the foundations are not the best. So it's taken into consideration the over usage of it in the past and the effect it has in the long term.
I think making sure, like, Shropshire is hilly at the south but quite flat at the top. Obviously there'd be larger impacts on turning a hill into a mining thing in North Shropshire than there would in South Shropshire. But you also the areas of natural beauty, so it's difficult balance, but making sure that we're not self-sustaining, but we do still have the ability to have. Anyway, moving on to the next question. I personally agree with it, but I would, so I don't see there's nothing that jumps out to me as not a good reason to site identify.
Jonathan?
The counter to that would be, if we're aiming to be carbon neutral by 2030 or whenever, is mining or using minerals something we should be endorsing or at least put a caveat on it?
Yes, essentially. It's just if you think there's any other sources of them finding sites, and some of that will be talking to people, not necessarily looking at a map or a plan. I think that's what they're drifting at.
I was just going to say that the current methodology of suggesting the sites come in from landowners, if you're looking for alternative methods, the only way you could do it is that start looking at things like compulsory purchase, which isn't really a suitable method. You actually are trying to encourage people who already own land and sites, as Shropshire have done, to come in and make suggestions as they would provide that.
If from a clarification point of view, if historically, and certainly with the call for sites, it's a request to people who want to put forward sites, and that invariably is developers and landowners who've got a vested interest in promoting their land. But does that mean it's the best land? So Birmingham, when they did their call for sites, they got none. So they used a program called Placemaker, and they put in the criteria of the sites they wanted, and it spat out programmatically a list of all the land registry red line things with all the contact details, and then they phoned everybody, and then they got their site sorted that way. So in terms of approach, you'll get a different kind of response, because because one's reactive and one's proactive.
I see.
That's kind of where I think that's at, but I stand to be corrected. John? Sorry, James.
Very insulting for Jonathan. The one thing I noticed is there's not much, I think, I'll insult my parents by saying I agree with infill of sites that are currently sort of one building within a town and turn them into residential accommodation. So we've had a few applications in Oswald Street, like on Willow Street, where they've sort of they're redeveloping sites. There's not many of those in the scoping exercise from what I can see. But it's also just long-term empty properties. Like, the chances are those properties can't really just be renovated. You'll have to redevelop them. Is looking at that site as are there other properties in that area that you could sort of turn into a sort of master plan and redevelop a larger area around those empty properties? So I think it's important that you look at, it's already a problem of Shropshire councils dealing with empty properties, so this is a way that you might be able to deal with it, is including them as one-off sites of, look, this is a bit of land that you can put a house on, and it would then be a new house rather than just a dilapidated one.
When you do that, it could be demolition to get a brownfield site, or you could be talking about redevelopment of retail to residential use. I mean, my argument, and this is my opinion generally, not as portfolio, in the past, if you've had a housing target and you get X number of sites come forward, there's a temptation from a process point of view of just picking sites by the number that add up to the total you need, and without even looking at the needs. Because you've hit the target, you then make everything else fit because you've made the number balance, which is kind of an accountancy way of doing it. And from my own personal point of view, I think it's better to have a much more holistic approach and get to the target you need the right way.
So can I just come back?
Yeah. And then
Dad wanted to say, I'll summarise.
It's a family argument about infill building. I've got no objection to redevelopment where you are improving effectively a brownfield site by removing old and broken down buildings and building new. My thoughts about infill was where you've got currently open areas which you then build on, and you're crushing more and more people into a smaller area, and you don't give them the provision they need in terms of open areas to walk around in, green areas that need to be in the middle of town. You don't just build on all those things to infill. That was my discussions with my son. But as far as the actual redevelopment of kind of old buildings is concerned, I fully concur.
But well, I'm sure James' counter-argument's just come in, but did that involve about urban sprawl and you can't keep going outwards? Or? Okay. Yeah,
sure. Sorry.
Go on then.
The first one is the industrial areas that, if a load come empty on the industrial estate, moving into those. And the other one was above shops in the town centre. Like, there's not many. You don't see that as a site, but you can put 2 flats above a 3-story shop, and that's infilling. No.
Oh, and then we'll have to move on.
Yeah, okay. I got no objection to that at all, but one thing we're forgetting is to provide the infrastructure in place for parking. It's all very well building more and more buildings if you haven't got the place to put the vehicles that the family would use to travel to employment and back again. They may well get around the town using cycles and walking and so on, but they may have to get somewhere else in order to get to employment. Not all the employment will be in the town. And so developments should take that into consideration, because we've already seen where you're building, where you're putting buildings above shops. That's great, but then the argument for them for the ability to use vehicles is that you can use the local car parks, which isn't sustainable.
But there are different ways of intensifying development in urban areas, and the continental approach would be to underground the car park and build on top. So, yeah. Yeah. That's about their approach, isn't it? Well, you'd have to have a good reason to. Yeah, yeah. But you'd have never done it last week.
No. I think that would be agree on density. Infrastructure, I think, is a big issue thing. Housing mix, I put to agree. Just to match the priorities of the council itself. Approach to affordable housing is strongly agree. Managing new and existing employment, we've mentioned a lot. The viability of the town centre is yes. Renewable energy, I put to agree. I mean, Jonathan has issued a, I think, we'll go with strongly agree to match the room. Minimal safeguarding, yeah, and site-specific requirements, I think, is strongly agree. And the explanation is to match our corporate priorities. Are there any other broad policy areas that would benefit from being addressed in our next local plan? I think that was quite a comprehensive list of. Yeah. The provision of afterlife services.
Whole life infrastructure.
So to support.
Wendy.
Sorry. Yeah.
On the opposite side of that, we've mentioned shops, employment, etc. Have we actually mentioned health, like medical centre type ideas? Does that come within the scope of it?
It should be relative to the size of the development. So the bigger the development, the more they'll leverage in providing GP practices.
As long as it, if we need to say it specifically.
I think there's an issue of we have capacity facilities where adding even 20 more houses would push it beyond, and it's the viability of then having two centres that you're sort of taking away some of the old capacity and making two centres. So it doesn't matter if you're building 600 houses or 20, you can have a massive impact on the viability of a health centre or a school, because if you build a new school, that's a massive increase in capacity, but you're actually making the current existing capacity more sort of sustainable.
But then if you're doing active travel and all that kind of stuff, then you want more smaller facilities closer to people that they can access without a car, I think. So there's arguments both ways.
Yeah. I think the use of plain English, I think all of that strongly agree. No. I personally think it should be given to every property to engage with as a, it would cost a lot of money. It's probably about 60 grand to deliver to the whole of Shropshire, but it's whether as part of a plan that you do make sure that every property in Shropshire is made aware of this long-term plan. I don't think there's anything else that Shropshire does that, other than the budget once a year, that has such wide-ranging impacts on everyone, to make them aware. If people don't have internet because of the bad rural connectivity, etc., they're not going to be aware of it, and you'll have people who are isolated who this would also have an impact on, saying they don't want to be more connected, they'd rather their village stay a bit isolated. But they might, because they live in that way, they won't be picked up in the way that their current.
Well,
I think make every household aware of the consultation in some way.
we'll fill in this form. Compel everybody. That's the way it sounded then.
I mean, you could do it with, like, everyone gets a council tax form. They could have done it with that. Like, there's ways and means.
Oh, I know what you mean. But yeah.
I think it comes under their contract as any other. Is there any other evidence we feel to inform our local plan? I think ensuring that young voices are heard specifically rather than general, or I will correct that of saying of all ages, but a wide range of demographics. Do we have any other comments?
Hard to reach groups. I think you've done remarkably well given the time.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think it was a very good exercise to go through this in so much detail to allow for. I don't think we would have done this in a full council meeting.
No chance. Okay. I suppose the only other thing you haven't really covered is the Corphosites, and in terms of you might have had an observation about the shape and direction of development, whether there was a preference for any particular direction or not. But that would be the only other thing I would say you could have commented on.
I think an issue with Oswestry is we are confined to natural boundaries on pretty much every direction now, and despite them understanding that Oswestry has to expand to meet demand, It's which natural boundary do we want to cross is more important, like crossing the A5, going north over into the sort of agricultural hilly fields north, or heading south to sort of almost conglomerate around Mauder and create a much larger boundary. It's three very sort of satisfying options, but there aren't any other options within Oswestry now. We are very much sort of surrounded by hills to the north, a major road to the east, and another major settlement effectively to the south. So that we have an understanding that growth is currently restricted by natural boundaries in all directions, and it's important that future growth mitigates the sort of obvious impacts that crossing those boundaries will have on the, like crossing the A5 will have a similar impact to what we currently have as difficulty with the railway line cutting through. Like you'll have choke points of crossing into Oswestry, so every site has, going south, you're joining a village into the town, which has its own impacts, and going north has a lot more planning of sort of the natural environment impact. So we're just understanding of the situation, and we'll take everything on a site-by-site basis.
Okay, right. Thanks for that. Planning applications then. You've got the first one's a listed building consent, which you've already commented on the standard application. So it's just the counterpart of what we did before, really, which is the cinema. Jonathan.
Move we no observation.
James.
At the last meeting, we agreed that we shouldn't just say no observation, so
Yes.
either say neutral, support, or object. So I think for this one, we supported it last time and should repeat general support for the application.
Well, it would be very difficult to say something different to what you said last time. So
I'm sure the current council would love to embrace.
you'll be happy with that? Okay. 1 St John's Court. Mark and then Jonathan.
Yeah, we should support this. It's a previously pollarded tree, and all the people are doing is maintaining it and taking it back again. So I know it's in the conservation area, but since it's been done before, it's just a matter of maintaining it, which is what we do with our trees as well. So.
Jonathan.
Seconded.
Everybody in favour of that? Okay. 14 Oswald. Well. And then you've got Kevin Lane, number 12. Oh, is that your hand up? Oh, I thought you were playing with the microphone, sorry. James, and then Mark.
I was going to propose that we support it, as I don't think there's a planning reason to object to it, and ensuring that properties expand to the needs of the residents are important.
Mark.
Second.
Is everybody in favour of that? Okay, thank you. King's Head, listed building consent. James.
I think we've supported the external works. This is a different one, the King's Head, but I think it's a matter of, as long as it's in keeping with the building externally, as it's on the high street, I think there's no, and making sure that it does meet the design guides. for anything that can be visible from the high street.
But the listed building consent is more about the internal works. Mark?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's good to see that the pub in effect is being brought back into use. I was a little bit confused with some of the diagrams. It seemed to be changing its use from the traditional pub to the more of a kitchen and sit down and bar. But I could be mistaken with that.
It says proposed internal alterations including removal of partitions and fixed seating, refurbishment of WC, floor and structural works,
Yeah.
new timber finishes and replacement windows and doors.
So it's bringing it back into use,
Yeah.
which is I think we should support. It's good.
Jay?
Yeah, I think the use of the Kings is historic. It's more of a sort of evening venue, which you probably don't attend yourself, whereas I do. But it's a matter of, it's not out of keeping. I think it's working in, it's sort of managing the current use of it. So it's sort of just making it more available, and I think it does need a sort of spruce up. So, but again, this is listed building consent, as the chair said. So, I didn't see anything that affects the building, the listed status. There's nothing mentioned that is altered in this. So we should support it.
Seconding that way?
Yes.
Okay, everybody in favour of that? Okay, thank you. 55 Beatrice Street. James?
Having a look at this, I think I'd support it. I'm curious about what they're going to use the ground floor for, because that's not included in as it's not currently an open shop. So I'd just be concerned around the use of the ground floor, but that's not a planning issue. I think turning one very large flat into two smaller ones improves the viability, and also heads towards the sort of housing needs of the area. Of sort of one bedroom properties is much more need than necessarily the larger property that it was. So it aligns more with the housing needs of Oswestry by converting into two. We support it. I don't know if I said that.
Well, just still talking about restaurant use, isn't it, on the ground floor? But if you read the labels on that pink bit. Yeah. So, okay, Wendy seconded that. Everybody in favour of that? Thank you. 36 Victoria Road. Yeah. Was there any extras? No, it was just the local plan that was extra. There's 2 extras. Is it? Oh right, it's not on my printed thing. Hang on, let me just switch to my other device. Just seemed pretty close to the building. It's going to get much larger than that. James?
I think it's not visible from the main road on Willow Street there, so it's in the conservation area, but it's not going to have a material impact on what is seen by the public effectively. I'm always against just felling trees rather than trying to bring it into management, but I think with that particular tree being so close to the property, it's unlikely that you'd be able to fell it to a height that doesn't still have the same issues. So I will happily agree with the rest and propose that we support.
Is everybody in favour of that? Okay, thank you. Right, single story extension. James.
I like the fact that they've listened to the pre-app, from what I can see, and amended the pre-app, this to account for some of the comments made in the pre-application, especially given the fact that it's sort of going down a different level, and they've, instead of being in line with the whole house and therefore having quite a large fascia to the property, it is now stepped down to sort of accommodate for that. So generally I see no reason to object, so I'm happy to support.
Step down and back. So it is subservient. Is everybody happy with that? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much.